Today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most successful film franchise ever. To give you an idea, the revenue this movie universe has had almost triples the revenues of other giants like Star Wars and Harry Potter. However, something strange has been happening lately. The memes out there say that Lucille died with Quantumania and came back to life with Guardians of the Galaxy Vault. Secret Invasion killed her, Loki revived her, the Marvels killed her again, and she'll apparently return in Deadpool and Wolverine. And I think every Marvel Cinematic Universe fan understands the humor in this because yes, I think we all feel that the quality of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has not been as consistent lately. Something that many claim began to be felt from the ending movie, as many subsequent productions have certainly left much to be desired, both in terms of quality and box office terms. This topic can be approached in many ways. We can talk about superhero genre fatigue, how the pandemic has accustomed us to waiting to watch movies on streaming, or the immense amount of series that now it seems we have to watch before seeing a single movie. And all of this is true, and I have already talked about this in other videos. However, I believe that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a bigger problem and one that is particular to this franchise. That is, a problem that no other franchise has faced in the history of cinema. One that fortunately has a solution if we turn to look at the source material. I'm referring of course to the comics. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. Welcome to Geek Beats, quick hits of culture to nourish your inner geek. Today I'm going to talk about the biggest problem with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how to solve it. But before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Do you like those card games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh? If so, I have a gift for you. Codem TSG, my friends, sent us a beautiful package of their products to try. It's a strategic card game that's 100% Mexican, featuring iconic characters from our culture. Here, you will need to plan your strategy with creature cards, magical axolotls, alebrijes, dragons, dinosaurs, and much more. Important facts, it's not a game of chance, it's a strategy game. It moves away from pay to win, meaning it's not about who spends the most. And above all, it's important to emphasize that it's not an expensive game, so it's accessible to everyone unlike other TSGs. This game takes place in a post-apocalyptic Mexico. It has a whole lore behind it that you can also discover through its comics. Today, Codem TSG will give away a box like this, which contains 12 envelopes to start playing. How can you win? It's very simple. You just have to follow them and me on Instagram, find this post and tag 2 friends you want to play with. Then a winner will be chosen at random who will get one of these boxes delivered to their doorstep. This is a great chance to try something new and support Mexican talent, so don't miss out. I wish you a lot of luck, and now let's dive right into the topic. Let's first talk about what made the Marvel Cinematic Universe so successful, because curiously that's where its biggest flaw comes from. And to be able to analyze the topic much better, this time I had the opportunity to talk with the historian and comic book specialist Luis Gantus, who was here in Querétaro organizing the comic pavilion of the Filmac 2024. Events like these are rare in my city, so I had to attend.
Marvel excelled in the initial stage. Based on what worked in the comics, you introduce the character, tell their story, and then
you confront the
other character.
This approach of introducing 2 or more characters independently and then making them work together is something we saw brilliantly executed in the early stages of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, it is something that derives from the early Marvel comics. And when I say the very first ones, I mean the first ones when Marvel Comics wasn't even called Marvel, it was called Timely Comics. Nowadays, it seems perfectly normal to us to see 2 characters from different movies or comics interact in a single story. But do you know what was the first superhero crossover in history? It's this comic from 1940 where Namor, the Submariner, and the first Marvel superhero faces off against the android known as the Human Torch in the Great Battle of Fire vs. Water. From there, interconnected superhero universes started to become more and more common. In the same year, the Justice Society, the first superhero team, was formed. A year later, Superman would meet Batman and Robin for the first time. But a major watershed was experienced in the 60s, in the golden age of Marvel Comics. And it's because since Stan Lee basically wrote all the titles of that era, for him it was a habit to have his characters frequently mention other superheroes or make these casual crossovers where characters from different titles met, even if it was for a couple of panels. All this with the intention of giving the illusion of an interconnected universe that exists, where in the blink of an eye, the Fantastic Four could go visit Spider-Man. And this evolved over time to these modern crossovers where dozens of characters are involved in a single story, like for example the Secret Wars of 1984. But not only that, don't you think you've seen this dynamic somewhere else? This formula that was so successful in comics was precisely the one that the Marvel Cinematic Universe adapted to create this great universe of interconnected movies, since often one movie referenced another, or we saw these little cameos that precisely served to keep the universe connected, something that had never been seen to date in cinema. Which I find very interesting because then we see that what made the Marvel Cinematic Universe great in the first place was paying attention to the narrative found in the comics. We can see this from the first Iron Man film, as in the post-credits scene we see Nick Fury talking to Tony Stark about the Avengers Initiative, something that was a complete surprise for comic fans of that time. But this was so different from what was being done that, I'm gonna be honest with you, I personally didn't find out about this post-credits scene until many months later. I watched Iron Man in the cinema and left as soon as the credits started, because it really wasn't that common for there to be a post-credits scene. A few months later, I found out about the existence of this scene from a music student I had, and I got very excited, like 6 months later, but I got very excited. I thought adding Nick Fury was a brilliant idea. It opened up a whole world of possibilities.
For those who knew and for those who didn't.
This trend of paying attention to comics continued for a while. In fact, Loki in the comics is also the first villain the Avengers faced. What can be said about this iconic post-credits scene? Didn't it excite you a lot the first time you saw it?
The concept of presenting heroes in an interconnected universe
and eventually making them work together was basically what we saw throughout Phase 2 and 3 of Marvel, which culminated in the Endgame movie.
Endgame, which can make the plot as ridiculous as it wants, but that final battle is what everyone was waiting for at some point.
Do you remember what it was like to see Avengers Endgame in the theater? It's been 5 years since the premiere of that film, and I still remember all the emotions I experienced with that movie both in the theater and outside of it. The tickets for the premiere sold out in all Querétaro theaters, something unprecedented and not seen since, even with films like Avatar 2 or No Way Home. In fact, I couldn't see it on the day of the premiere. I had my tickets, but something came up at work that day, which I couldn't change. I gave away my tickets, and a day later, my job was cancelled. I ended up looking stupid because I couldn't find tickets in any cinema in my city. So I avoided social media that night, and the next day, as soon as my son got out of school, we attended the earliest showing. I thought about letting him skip school to go to the cinema earlier, but decided it wouldn't be good parenting. Luckily, he left early. We hit the cinema around 1 p.m. to an empty room. Fortunately, I was able to enjoy the entire movie without spoilers. I witnessed the drama of Black Widow, Iron Man's sacrifice, and Captain America's ending. But above all, I was very moved by this scene of the portals and seeing all these characters that Marvel built over years to face the great enemy seemingly behind everything for 22 movies. As a DC Comics fan more than Marvel, I'm not one to scream in the cinema. However, this scene was so epic that I couldn't help but shout with excitement when Cap finally said, "Avengers Assemble," with the emotional background music. This film undoubtedly gave me one of my best geek memories ever, but I would love for you to tell me, did something similar happen to you? Tell me in the comments.
But notice how the same thing they did in the comics was repeated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You're telling the story, warming up and generating an event where you gather them all, separate them, start telling the stories separately again, gather them again, you're warming up the main story and generating the annual events. In the end, you think it's a great story? The death of Iron Man, the whole thing with Captain America deciding to live a life. You say, okay, this is the end. What are you going to do next? And that was the question
that we all were asking ourselves. This is where the Marvel Cinematic Universe's great virtue becomes its major flaw. And it's that this formula where you introduce more and more characters and make them interact at one point is doomed to collapse. Because there is a limit. I mean, how many characters can you introduce in a coherent plot while also giving each character their weight and importance? I mean, basically, you can't keep making the movies bigger and bigger. And that's it. In some post-Endgame productions like No Way Home or Multiverse of Madness, Marvel Studios has tried to replace a high number of cameos with the introduction of characters from other franchises so that the audience continues to feel like it's a big event, something that has worked as these films have some of the best box offices that Marvel has had post-Endgame. Deadpool and Wolverine will likely deliver this as well. But the problem remains the same. You've already brought together other universes. What's next? I suppose bringing together more characters from other universes in Secret Wars as fan arts predict. And it's surely going to work with these movies, but this approach leaves aside all those standalone movies and series that are not big events in themselves. The question is, how do you make the audience feel that all these other small films that are also coming out are worth it? The comics hold the answer, though it may not be a Marvel-specific concept.
And yes, they were always extraordinary characters in extraordinary situations. In Marvel, no. They were, yes, ordinary characters, ordinary people in extraordinary situations. And then you saw Thor in love with his nurse, like Donald Blake, to you saw Iron Man alcoholic. Sometimes life was much more interesting. The man had to deal with his aunt's illness, with school, with dating, with friends, with your best friend's father is your worst enemy, bastard. Those dramas, those moments are what made Marvel great. We were eager to read about Peter Parker's adventures and his battles with villains, but you would dismiss it, asking what's next. I mean, did Aunt May get saved? And yes, I
feel that many of these movies lack this human drama that made Marvel so unique at the time. And let me tell you something about the great flaw of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Films like Quantumania, The Marvels, or Love and Thunder were horrible to me because they simply seem like a spectacle full of senseless punches, generic villains, ugly but expensive computer-generated imagery, and a bunch of jokes that really don't keep the plot afloat. The worst part is that these movies had interesting elements that went unexploited. Captain Marvel's actions leave an entire civilization in civil war and on the brink of an ecological collapse. But this hardly weighs on the plot. Love and Thunder in its first minutes shows us a villain who has a religious existential crisis and very valid reasons to oppose the gods. And this is immediately turned into a joke. We also see Jane Foster facing cancer, but this is not explored seriously either, and even in Quantumania they could explore more the fact that Scott Lang missed many years of his daughter and this creates a gap between them. Why? Because human drama is one of the pillars of Marvel Comics. In fact, movies like Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3 or Wakanda Forever did explore these human themes more deeply and were much better received than the other films I already mentioned. And this makes sense because that's also how the comics work. It was precisely this drama that made stories like Spider-Man, Hulk, or the Fantastic Four so successful in the first place because it felt like something fresh, something new, since before them all superheroes had perfect lives and perfect stories, so readers quickly identified with this new format. Superman and DC Comics created the modern superhero figure, but Marvel Comics created the modern superhero. Looking at the comics doesn't mean copying exactly. I believe movies don't need to be exact replicas of the original story. Rather, I believe it's about analyzing which elements have already worked in other media and finding the right way to adapt them to film. The Marvel Cinematic Universe successfully created an interconnected movie universe, but they should now focus more on exploring the character's human side. Perhaps they think the audience won't tolerate them. Perhaps the executives think that superhero fans only want to see action. And yes, of course, action is a very important point in the stories. However, this action feels empty if there isn't a human element that we can connect with. For now, I have no doubt that Deadpool and Wolverine, a film with two extremely popular characters, where Marvel Studios also plays with the multiverse card, will be a success regardless of the quality. However, if the Marvel Cinematic Universe wants to continue to be relevant, I think it's time for them to look beyond the big fights and beyond all this spectacle of multiversal changes. It's time to explore who these characters are beyond their powers.